Hello and welcome back, everybody. This is Cuban Elbows handling the Federalist Papers as part of my reading assignment. I also dubbed this a daydreamer reads to his son. What am I reading? The Federalist Papers. Why? Because I am seeking a framework for my own political theory. I'm sure it's going to be an amalgam of this or that and rooted in working class strength and all that. But it's interesting to see what the founders, how the founders positioned themselves when they were justifying the Constitution. And in the first Federalist paper, I could say that there was a theme of pluralism in anticipation of the various debates that were going to get in the way of forming a constitution where there would be a centralized body that would rule over the colonies versus a distinct separation of confederacies, all with their own, even though they all fought together, it's going to create some problems. In addition, I found it surprising some of the specific language that was used by John Jay in Federalist 2 because if you're squinting through white supremacist glasses, you're going to see exactly the kind of technical language you're going to co-opt into thinking about who exactly is represented by the founding of the United States. I want to make it clear, after doing it, it prompted me to sort of look more carefully at the situation. Of the 2.5 million, roughly 2.5 million of the population-wise of those 13 colonies, there was about 500,000 Africans, mostly slaves, and it is said that 9,000 of them joined freely to fight in the revolution for slavery, to participate in the nation of free and equal men, and essentially they believed that they were fighting for not just their own freedom, but emancipation, the idea in general. Right now, this is me loosely looking this up. So we have to understand that there was a significant contribution from non-whites in the Revolutionary War, and that needs to be factored in when we think about a nation of united people of similar values and cultures. And although John Jay kind of makes it seem that there is, dare I say, something racially implied. I mean, I'd have to go back and really nitpick it, but the thing is that, like I said, if you're squinting and if you wanted to make the case that early on in the Federalist Papers that there is some of a nationalist slant, right? That's the language. Now, if you take those glasses off and you just look at someone emphatically trying to ally the 13 colonies to see themselves as the same, such that they can conceivably rule through a shared document, that they can essentially join these confederacies, then it'd be fine. I believe a very similar argument would be made. Back before we understood the evils of nationalism, it would have just been fine to say we're all the same, we all fought the same, we all bled the same, we're the same, and we will continue to defend these colonies the same, therefore we must be a nation. Common sense wise, it fits. But as somebody who looks at and would channel the spirit of the Constitution as the Declaration of Independence, I realize that some folks are going to similarly take a concept or a theme and use it to reinterpret the whole founding documents. I mean, if I were on the other side, I would certainly make that point. Even though I don't necessarily think that is the best way to interpret it, which makes me feel, just at the very beginning, comparing pluralism to nationalism, is that it comes down to the generation that's in control. It comes down to the folks who are in power at any given point in time to decide how they're going to look at reality. And given that there are multiple ways to look at it, and makes the whole thing rather flimsy, because then it has to do with whether or not the voter has the capacity to choose a noble figure, Or will they succumb to some sort of Faustian bargain, some sort of populist deal for the person who sounds great but is actually nefarious? That vulnerability appears to be baked in because there was no way that they could guarantee. Well, we have to read the rest of the Federalist Papers to see if there is a more complete understanding of this, but there was no way to guarantee that subsequent generations were going to factor human dignity into the equation by default, right? So here begins Federalist No.3, continuing from John Jay. It is titled "The Same Subject, Continued, Concerning Dangers from Foreign Force and Influence." Now, obviously, they just fought the British. They're concerned about Europe. They're concerned about an entire tradition of imperial rule, and how the nation is going to stand against that. But I wonder if it's going to stay there, or if there's going to be some more, shall I say, undertones to it that feel hierarchical, that basically attempt to establish a new hierarchy of culture, right? And I'm sensitive to this because, ideally we root out racism, and we say that it had not, that, when they said all men are created equal, they really meant it. Anyway, okay, so this is for the Independent Journal, Saturday, November 3rd, 1787. John Jay begins. To the people of the state of New York, it is not a new observation that the people of any country, if like the Americans, intelligent and well informed, seldom adopt a steadily persevere for many years in an erroneous opinion respecting their interests. That consideration naturally tends to create great respect for the high opinion which the people of America have so long and uniformly entertained of the importance of their continuing firmly united under one federal government, vested with sufficient powers for all general and national purposes. General and national, not simply national, not simply, if I may, pause commentary. General welfare, national defense. This duality is already started to appear, right? Copy. The more attentively I consider and investigate the reasons which appear to have given birth to this opinion, the more I become convinced that they are cogent and conclusive. Among the many objects to which a wise and free people find it necessary to direct their attention, that of providing for their safety, capital safety, seems to be the first. The safety of the people doubtless has relation to a great variety of circumstances and considerations, and consequently affords great latitude to those who wish to define it precisely and comprehensively. At present, I mean only to consider it as it respects security for the preservation of peace and tranquility, as well as against dangers from foreign arms and influence, in caps, foreign arms and influence, as from dangers of the like kind, caps, arising from domestic causes. So there is a kind of a danger that foreign arms and influence can yield, and there is a similar danger that can be arisen from within the nation. As the former of these comes first in order, it is proper it should be the first discussed. Let us therefore proceed to examine whether the people are not right in their opinion that a cordial union under an efficient national government affords them the best security that can be devised against hostilities from abroad. So, what John Jay is starting to say is that the reason we want to form a nation is because we have a common enemy, and a nation is going to allow us to unite our strengths in order to keep our border secure, keep our interests sound. Right? We have to think of the enemy when we are deciding whether or not to unite. This is the same thing that you would do if you're trying to unite a base against immigration. This is the same thing you would do if you're trying to unite class consciousness against the billionaire. I'm sorry, this is all commentary, by the way. But you describe the enemy in order to unite the people. You have to describe an opposition so that people have an understanding why they should hold together against a common cause. I wish it wasn't always the case, but unfortunately rhetoric still demands that there be attention paid to contrasts so that one side can see how it is culturally bound together. Otherwise, there's a high likelihood that your people are going to find differences on their own and then start fighting each other. No. Okay, back to the copy. The number of wars which have happened or will happen in the world will always be found to be in proportion to the number and weight of the causes, whether real or pretended, which provoke or invite them. If this remark be just, it becomes useful to inquire whether so many just causes of war are likely to be given by united America as by disunited America. For if it should turn out that united America will probably give the fewest, then it will follow that in this respect the Union tends most to preserve the people in a state of peace with other nations. So a united America provides less reason to go to war because, it will take more, commentary, it will take more consensus to arrive at a designation of war than it would be small confederacies that will have all number of grievances externally and within. Back to the copy. The just causes of war, for the most part, arise either from violation of treaties or from direct violence. America has already formed treaties with no less than 6 foreign nations, and all of them, except Prussia, are maritime, and therefore able to annoy and injure us. She has also extensive commerce with Portugal, Spain, and Britain, and with respect to the two latter, has, in addition, the circumstance of neighborhood to attend to. It is of high importance to the peace of America that she observe the laws of nations towards all these powers, and to me it appears evident that this will be more perfectly and punctually done by one national government than it could be either by 13 separate states or by 3 or 4 distinct confederacies. Because when once an efficient national government is established, the best men in the country will not only consent to serve, but also will generally be appointed to manage it. The best men. For although town or country or other contracted influence may place men in state assemblies or senates or courts of justice or executive departments, yet more general and extensive reputation for talents and other qualifications will be necessary to recommend men to offices under the national government, especially as it will have the widest field for choice and never experience that want of proper persons which is not uncommon in some of the states. Hence, it will result that the administration, the political councils, and the judicial decisions of the national government will be more wise, systematical, and judicious than those of individual states, and consequently more satisfactory with respect to other nations, as well as more safe with respect to us. So he's saying that by organizing an efficient body that can rule over all 13 states, you're going to have a standard that everyone is going to essentially commit to, and that standard is going to develop basically national respect. It's not going to suffer any of sort of the inadequacies or balances of just one. Commentary. It's not gonna suffer the inadequacies or the imperfections of like one state or one confederacy. It's going to be an agreement by the broad consensus by which the government kind of concede some powers to, and that the nations can deal with more efficiently, right? Okay, back to copy. Because under the national government, treaties and articles of treaties, as well as the laws of nations, will always be expounded in one sense and executed in the same manner, whereas educations on the same points and questions in 13 states or in 3 or 4 confederacies will not always accord or be consistent, and that as well from the variety of independent courts and judges appointed by different and independent governments as from the different local laws and interests which may affect and influence them. I see. Okay. The wisdom of the convention in committing such questions to the jurisdiction and judgment of courts appointed by and responsible only to one national government cannot be too much recommended. Because the prospect of present loss or advantage may often tempt the governing party in 1 or 2 states to swerve from good faith and justice. But those temptations not reaching the other states, and consequently having little or no influence on the national government, the temptation will be fruitless and good faith and justice be preserved. The case of the Treaty of Peace with Britain adds great weight to this reasoning. So he's saying that, look, the more people that are involved, the less likely it is for a harebrained scheme to take over the country. Which is why, a commentary on this, which is why it's sort of alarming that in fact it does feel, sometimes through the use of the media and the world made more isolated, that they've created the illusion that the majority of Americans are actually in support of this administration, when even though the polls don't indicate it, but because they control the media, they make certain pockets of America feel very empowered, and other people who are vulnerable to feel empowered that Trump has the right of the way. Media has essentially cut our communication and our access to information and our likelihood to be similarly educated. It's shredded all these things. There's no standard for human development, and there's no standard for the press and the media, because it's all controlled by money. So if they stop that consensus that is required, or they interrupt how difficult that is by essentially carving up social consciousness according to our differences, then they've turned a big problem into a much more manageable problem because of technology. And they didn't factor this in to this period. So this is a fair thing that he's saying. He's saying that, it's difficult to convince the masses of a bad idea. There's lots of individuals that are going to be invested in. A few of them who have crazy ideas are just taking over a little territory that's not going to matter to the big, federal equation. But that was before the people were sort of disconnected from politics. There were so many levels of bureaucracy in between man and government, and that was before we had technology to then strip us of that sensitivity and that bond, and to make essentially over 300 million people feel like they're all in their own echo chambers, right? Okay, but now they're talking about a treaty with Britain and the debate over that. Back to copy. Because even if the governing party and a state should be disposed to resist such temptations, yet as such temptations may and commonly do result from circumstances peculiar to the state, and may affect a great number of the inhabitants, the governing party may not always be able, if willing, to prevent the injustice meditated or to punish the aggressors. But the national government, not being affected by those local circumstances, will neither be induced to commit the wrong themselves, nor want power or inclination to prevent or punish its commission by others. So the national government, it could be above the swaying winds of any given state. This is assuming that people who are elected to government are neutral and not partisan. It would be one thing if the federal government were a nonpartisan body, but because the federal government is also affected by the two-party system, what he's talking about a sort of a neutral federal government that operates beyond the politics of the state, and that can sort of be a bulwark against any sort of extreme going one way or the other, fails. It fails in a two-party system because you have two sides that are jockeying to decide what reality is. Anyway, back to copy. So far, therefore, as either designed or accidental violations of treaties and the laws of nations afford just causes of war, they are less to be apprehended under one general government than under several lesser ones, and in that respect the former most favors the safety of the people. So it's basically saying that a big government is slower to move, and therefore less likely to go to war, and therefore less likely to jeopardize the safety of the people. Back to copy. As to those just causes of war which proceed from direct and unlawful violence, it appears equally clear to me that one good national government affords vastly more security against dangers of that sort than can be derived from any other quarter. Because such violences are more frequently caused by the passions and interests of a part than of the whole, of one or two states than of the Union, not a single Indian war has yet been occasioned by aggressions of the present federal government, feeble as it is. But there are several instances of Indian hostilities having been provoked by the improper conduct of individual states, who, either unable or unwilling to restrain or punish offenses, have given occasion to the slaughter of many innocent inhabitants. So if I'm reading this right, sorry, commentary. So not a single Indian war. So you're saying no wars are good. Less wars are better. Such violences. Now he's talking about violence from the previous paragraph where he says the just causes of war which proceed from direct and unlawful violence. But because such violences are more frequently caused by the passions and interests of a part than of the whole, of one or two states than of the Union, not a single Indian war has yet been occasioned by aggressions of the present federal government. So the federal government has not gone into a local skirmish, feeble as it is, but there are several instances of Indian hostilities having been provoked by the improper conduct of individual states who, either unable or unwilling to restrain or punish offenses, have given occasion to the slaughter of many innocent inhabitants. And that is where we see where John Jay is aligned. He holds his countrymen accountable for the abuses of the indigenous. Back to copy. The neighborhood of Spanish and British territories bordering on some states and not on others naturally confines the causes of quarrel more immediately to the borders. The bordering states, if any, will be those who, under the impulse of sudden irritation and a quick sense of apparent interest or injury, will be most likely by direct violence to excite war with these nations. And nothing can so effectually obviate the danger as a national government, whose wisdom and prudence will not be diminished by the passions which actuate the parties immediately interested. So a national government can essentially tame the border states, at least in theory. I'm sorry, that was commentary. I had to copy. But not only fewer just causes of war will be given, by the national government, but it will also be more in their power to accommodate and settle them amicably. There will be more temperature and cool, and in that respect, as well as in others, will be more in capacity to act advisedly than the offending state. So basically, the federal government can be a commentary. The federal government, in this case, is intended to be a mediator for states that may not act with the full picture in play. The pride of, back to copy. The pride of states, as well as of men, naturally disposes them to justify all their actions, and opposes their acknowledging, correcting, or repairing their errors and offenses. The national government, in such cases, will not be affected by this pride, but will proceed with moderation and candor to consider and decide on the means most proper to extricate them from the difficulties which threaten them. They're looking at the government like it's a bunch of mediating empaths. Commentary. This is crazy to me, because that is not what is going on in Federalist 3. Holy shit, man. Damn it, man. I'm going to have to reread all this shit and then take quotes. I'm going to end up rereading the Federalist Papers. This is not the first time we're going to read it. We're going to do like a second reading. What I will do is I will probably do a second reading privately and then publish notes along with this into the comments, so I can actually pull out text and then you guys can see what's going on, because this is if we were to like pay attention to these guys and like listen to them, they're obviously not hot-headed fucking freaks that we see in the Heritage Foundation trying to gaslight us into thinking that we are this fucking bigoted country that they want us to be. Anyway, I'm sorry. My bias is showing because right now I haven't seen anything in what they're offering that actually represents a better form of America than we have. They want to break everything down and reform it to support the very few. And they don't care if they have to make a deal with, the techno-feudalists or straight up Nazis or whatever, or a Christo-fascists or anything like that. It seems like it's a who's who of people you don't want to have dinner with. And I mean, that's the way it seems. I would love for them to come out and say, let's, wealth tax is shit, emancipate the folks who, immigrated here and are being exploited. Let's, let's do good things for the people, but that's just not what they're about. Back to copy. Besides, it is well known that acknowledgments, explanations, and compensations are often accepted as satisfactory from a strong united nation, which would be rejected as unsatisfactory if authored by a state or confederacy or little consideration of power. So the smaller the group, the less they're going to be taken seriously by foreign powers. Sorry, that was commentary. Back to copy. In the year 1685, the state of Genoa, having offended Louis XIV, endeavored to appease him. He demanded that they should send their doge, or chief magistrate, accompanied by 4 of their senators, to France to ask his pardon and receive his terms. They were obliged to submit to it for the sake of peace. Would he on any occasion either have demanded or have received the like humiliation from Spain or Britain or any other powerful nation? Oh. Okay. That is it. That is the final point. Okay, so in the year 1685, the state of Genoa, having offended Louis XIV, endeavored to appease him. He demanded that they should send their doge, or chief magistrate, accompanied by 4 of their senators, to France to ask his pardon and receive his terms. They were obliged to submit to it for the sake of peace. Would he, on any occasion, either have demanded... So basically, this last point is saying that if a border state loses its cool and is about to be humiliated, we're forced to comply for the sake of being overwhelmed by an imperial interest, have to now, submit, yield to negotiation of terms. Would that be likely to happen if it were part of a bigger government that actually was packing some weight and some heat and united, So there's power there. So he's making... so this is all commentary, and this is the end of this Federalist 3. But he's basically explaining how game theory is supposed to work. When several different units of people are working together and yielding to collective power, then what you have is greater bargaining potential to keep the people safe, which is what he wants. He wants to keep the people safe. And safety comes from strong bargaining power, and strong bargaining power comes from collective unity or unionizing, which is essentially what happens when you take an electorate and you unionize them. That creates the government that we are supposed to have today. So when we don't have that, and you can see it's because of union-busting moves from individuals who want to take that collective power and turn it inwards towards themselves for selfish reasons, then you have a very different type of almost like Pharaoh-like top-down authoritarian energy that it produces nothing and wants to control all the power that has been generated from a far more collective view of power, okay? A more democratic and collective view of even the value of the nation. And this now is beginning to second the pluralistic aims of Hamilton in the Federalist 1. It's starting to tie these themes together to explain that by the power of friendship is what will make America truly a strong and great nation. Now, again, these are... We're talking about 1780 something, right? The more that I start to analyze this through the scope of empowering the people, the more I'm likely going to have to prepare for the argument that the language is dated and that there are other factors, whatever, and we have something, that it's sort of like interpreting it this way is actually, trying to co-opt it into something that America was never intended to be based upon some other fact, who knows what. But if I'm just looking at the text here, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to deepen my view of what the Constitution represents as the sum total agreement based upon this rhetoric, and to see if there was any consistency coming away from the Declaration of Independence to sort of say that, well, they said it once. we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. But did they really mean that through and through? Did they really think that? Was that a well manicured and produced thinking after like a lot of deliberation? Or was it something that they said to win a war? And I think that they had to be the cooler heads in a very hostile environment to imagine a future where they and their families and their country were living safe and protected under the agreements that not only they had amongst themselves, but that they had with the rest of the world, and with the power to back that up, because they had already shown that they were willing to fight once. So this is a lot of instruction for today's statesmen, okay, who seem to have forgotten the path. And if I were which I don't have the qualifications. There are no qualifications, but in terms of like pedigree, right? I would have to prove, I think, through debate and through a lot of public service that I am one of the best men. And if I were one of the best men, and if I were standing in Congress, so far within the first Federalist Papers, now as I'm starting to see patterns emerge, I believe I can rely on this document in order to frame my thesis. And I can stand on historic principle, and I can, of both pluralism and collectivism, and I can explain through game theory terms, which I think most people who run companies and who run organizations today, or who think of law and order, can relate to. I think I can make the case that they can understand that even though they have different persuasions, even though they have all different interests, and even though sometimes those interests may ally to concentrate power so that they can divvy up the spoils, what we are seeing is the competition that leads to more grievance, to more war, right? To more hostility, to more open division. And this is not in the interest of the general welfare. This is not in the interest of the peace of their citizens. What would be is essentially a cooler disposition, one of compromise, one of negotiation, one of empathy, so that we can have a very powerful nation, but powerful because we yield to each other purposefully to create a central way forward. If with the ongoing government shutdown and the brinksmanship that our president has brought to the equation, we are seeing how disastrous it is to have people that don't understand. The folks that must be elected to the federal government must be mediators, statesmen, negotiators, compromisers. If they're going to make a deal, make an actual deal. Trump is not making a deal. He's standing on his own ego as the justification to ruin the country. And this is why he's effectively a bad president. B-A-D. Clear, clinical, decisive. He's a bad president because he's not emulating what the country needs in order to find balance, persistency, and consistency of power and purpose, and unity with its people. So, and in order to be better than him, you have to not only practice these values, but you have to find a way to communicate this deliberately, consistently, through long-form organizing across the nation. I don't think you can unite the nation from one coastal city, one, advocating from D.C. I think what you've got to do is you've got to label a campaign, label a tour, and issue talks, sort of like they do comedy tours, sort of like what Trump was doing when he was organizing for years in between his presidencies. I think you've got to be able to do this, and you have to have some ability to get around. I don't know. YouTube might provide that option. Certainly starting a business, thinking more critically about that is an option. And this is something that I think that if there is a way to get that going, and really needs to become a part of the solution. I'm thinking that anybody who really supports working class economy has to put some notes together, and then has to go to town halls across the country and sell it and get people to understand. And there's so much information to break down that really it could be quite interesting. You could do one every freaking year if you wanted to do it. But it is about the introduction of not just economics that everyday people can understand, but also politics in a way that everyday people can understand. People that have to manage their homes, manage their businesses, manage their families, manage their own careers, and manage their budgets at the kitchen table, right? So, okay, so that's where I'm at. And as you all know, I also have the Common President Project, the vlog, which I occasionally put videos up detailing my cognitive development as a potential speaker, statesman, policy writer, whatever. It's a really long journey, and these are long videos. But if you're with me, thank you very much for being there. I appreciate it. Thanks for listening. And the Federalist Papers reading and commentary will continue. So until then, thank you again. God bless you and God bless America. Have a good one.